Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I am sorry that we are running late today. We were having some technical difficulties on the guest side. We seem to have them at least halfway resolved right now, so we're going to go on with the show. My guest today is Seth Sturm, the chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party Indigenous Peoples Caucus. Looks like officially former chair now because of the bad news that we'll be talking about today in the midst of a lot of news that we'll be talking about today. Hey, Seth, say hi and tell us what's going on.
Well, I tell you, Chris, first and foremost, let me see if I can put up my picture, at least for my avatar here. I'm trying. But one of the things is I call myself the founding chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party Indigenous Caucus. After the cease and desist letter last year, I said, my thing has always been act in good faith. So I try to adhere to the party rules way more so than them. If somebody says you can't call yourself the chair anymore, that's fine. I'm the founding chair. I was the chair when we disbanded due to systemic racism and accusations therein from the failed implementation of our affirmative action plan. And, so I use the language that they want me to use while still fighting this battle. But yeah, we got some bad news. The 15 challengers, as we got some bad news last week. The DNC's RBC Rules and Bylaws Committee has decided that they're not going to hear our challenge. Made up reasons. They cited my actions. They said that all of this stemmed from my actions from disbanding the caucus. And it's continuing the pattern of the party not addressing the root issue of our disbandment, which was the discrimination and marginalization that we faced from people within the party, including DNC officials. One of them sat on the Rules and Bylaws Committee at the time, Harold Ickes. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Ickes. I had somebody tell me the other day it was Ikes. It didn't sound right to me either. I thought it was Ickes. So anyway, but we've got these DNC officials who I thought were rogue. I thought we had one rogue former Clinton official coming through in West Virginia and putting in their influence. But we take these things all the way up the ladder, the way that we're supposed to internally, fighting this for 3 years, only for the DNC to continue the pattern of procedural misconduct and not addressing the root issues. Discrimination is against their own charter and bylaws. And
of course.
And they're an organization based in Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. has its own human rights laws. Yes, they're violating that by not investigating or not taking seriously our claims of internal discrimination. They violated our civil rights whenever Harold Ickes and Selena Vickers admitted to conspiring at a meeting on how they could outvote minorities on the Affirmative Action Committee. They've admitted these things outright. And so now we're at the point now where I don't know about the other folks, but the Indigenous Caucus members we're pursuing all avenues. The internal process seems to be finished, which is what we've been trying to accomplish. We wanted to go through what we could internally, but we're going to continue pushing this issue because there's a story here, one that can't be overlooked. We can't ignore the fact that this Democratic Party has shown itself to be exclusionary in its policies in targeting minorities, especially. So we've got to do something to at least address that issue. I know a lot of people have given up on the Democratic Party already, but to allow them to continue to do this without any pushback just really gives up the issue. And we've got too many people dependent on having at least some sort of functioning Democratic Party to oppose the rising fascist tide that comes from the GOP, that we have to seriously consider the ways forward and holding the Democratic Party accountable, at least so that moving forward, they're less likely to engage in these types of outright racially motivated discriminatory practices. So that's our goal, and we're going to keep fighting. But internally, it does seem like our fight is finished.
Now, I'm reminded, because you talk about all avenues, I am reminded of the California court case against the DNC that ended up with the DNC arguing that they're a private corporation. They don't owe anything to anything but their members, and people who voted in a primary or are registered as Democrats aren't just Democrats or or people to whom the DNC is responsible because they call themselves Democrats. And they won that court case based on the idea that the DNC, in it as a corporate entity, is not responsible to the Democratic Party rank and file, meaning the voters.
Well, and honestly, that's probably I'm aware of that case, but in this situation, we're talking about party officials attacking other party officials.
Oh, sure,
and the internal groups. These caucuses are in and of themselves subsidiaries of the party and beholden to the same rules. So basically, you've got this Indigenous caucus that ultimately falls under the DNC's umbrella. But it filters down through to that level. So the DNC is ultimately responsible, which is why our challenge went to the DNC. And,
of course.
Right. So hopefully we can get some sort of resolution on this, because again, this is not just an issue facing West Virginians. This is something that's happening across the country. We have these people coming in and really exerting a lot of force over state Democratic parties, which makes it impossible for good people to organize.
I'm not so much trying to be pessimistic as trying to make sure you know what you're going to see. The bullshit about, we can't say anything was racist because you guys disbanded voluntarily, sort of ignores the fact that you guys disbanded voluntarily as a protest against what you saw as racism. And the whole point was to talk about the racism leading up to the disbandment. But they're saying the voluntary disbandment means we can't do anything. It's a technicality. They're hiding behind it.
That's right. They are. And again, if you read the language of the actual letter, which I've not released, I mean, it's not a big deal. But when you read the actual language of the letter, they make it clear that they're focusing on these technicalities, not really addressing our root issue, saying they don't have jurisdiction.
And you're going to see some sort of technical argument about the West Virginia State Party being a private club and therefore not bound by the same rules as public corporations or something like that. That's my prediction.
That's it. That's what I'm aware we're going to go up against that. And that's what we want to fight. We've got to establish a precedent. This is going to set a precedent if we can win this case. If we can bring this before somebody and they take a look at this and say, okay, you can't exert this kind of internal pressure against certain people within your party. You have to follow your own bylaws. I mean, there are arguably statutes that say that they have to abide by their own bylaws and apply the rules equally, based on their being a private corporation or a private entity. Now, again, you say private club. I want to see how all of this works out. I'm not going to be pursuing this pro se. I'm going to seek legal representation if we go down this route. So I'm prepared for the nonsense. I've seen the way just internally that they're able to completely deflect from the issue, which is what I assume they're going to try to do here. Through some sort of technicality to where we don't even have to bring up the fact that you have DNC officials colluding with West Virginia officials with the express purpose of keeping minorities from having influence on their own committee. I think that we've got a situation here where we've got a lot of evidence, 3 years worth, just collecting it. I mean, this all happened during the pandemic, which is interesting. Because it shaped a lot of the way we communicated. We did everything virtually. Everything was done via email. So things that would have happened that wouldn't be documented are very well documented in this case as they happened in real time. So we've got this great timeline showing the way that they would evolve and change the rules. So for instance, in August of 2021, the Affirmative Action Committee got together and we all voted that the subcommittees, which is where the Affirmative Action Plan for the party is drafted, that subcommittees would be open to anybody on the Affirmative Action Committee by just simply volunteering. After that meeting, Mary Ann Claytor and myself could not get put on any of the subcommittees. One of the chairs told us that they were stopped from putting us on it by the other chair. And then at the next meeting, they voted. Before the next meeting, they announced that it would be by appointment by chair only, basically. So they went against we voted for it. It was a decision that was made. And then through some technicality, they said that didn't actually go through. that wasn't passed. That wasn't the rule. So they didn't have to follow it. And then the next meeting, they changed it so that they could get away with not putting us on these committees. And it was around that time that Harold and Selena were caught admitting that they had worked around minorities on the committee. So there's a clear collusion between DNC officials and West Virginia officials. Like I said, they stated outright that their goal was to keep us from wielding influence on our own committee. So I think that there's a lot here that they thought they would get away with simply because we're small time. Like, what's West Virginia? And what's a West Virginia Natives Caucus with 10 people in it? What are they going to be able to do? Well, the issue is that you're violating our civil rights. You're using our identities, our struggles, while adding to those. You're oppressing the people, attacking the people on public forums, not just me. And you're supposedly the party that's going to back us in our fight for justice and for reconciliation. And it's just not true. So we've got to fight for that inclusion, because at the end of the day, party leadership, they're doing what do I want to say? They've taken control. They have total control of the party, but theoretically, the rank and file are the ones who should be making these decisions. So if the people are angry enough, we can replace these party leaders. You just have to demand action and accountability for what they've been doing. Take a look around and we get so caught up in the presidential race and these national politics that we're losing focus on the smaller levels, the state level. And they're not losing focus of it. These DNC officials are fully aware of how important it is to get in there and to control the base and the narrative in which direction the state parties are going, because the state parties can drag the national party into a certain direction if there are enough of them moving in that direction. And so they want to keep total control over the state level and the national level in terms of where we go as a party.
Remember when the DSA-led left-wing caucus in the Democratic Party of Nevada actually took over the state party, the Democratic Party stole the treasury, set up its own office claiming to still be the party, and ignored the new leadership of the state party. And that whole victory went for nothing, and nothing's changed in Nevada.
Right. That's what they do in every single state. So that's why in West Virginia a couple years ago, when they elected the new chair, and all of the news stories were about this progressive takeover and a rejection of Joe Manchin, should have raised everybody's hackles, right? It's not the case here in West Virginia.
And that's what you really need to pay attention to, because when a real progressive takeover happens, a la Nevada, the party entrenches itself and essentially secedes from itself in a way that comes off as saying, well, the progressives aren't really Democrats. Fuck them.
Well, it's funny too that's the angle they're taking now, is to completely wholly co-opt that language. I mean, you look at the way that they messaged whenever Mike Pushkin took over here in West Virginia. It was lauded as this huge progressive victory. And it simply wasn't. Anybody on the ground at that time, he was credibly accused of harassing a former partner in a really serious way, like abuse allegations, I would say. And the party went out and attacked this woman's character and defended Mike Pushkin, and then elected him. And then everybody's saying what a progressive takeover this is. These allegations against any Republican would have been fodder for us for weeks.
Well, now let's remember, because I want to address that since we're talking about it. You remember when I can't keep Republicans straight anymore. They change so often. The governor of South Carolina, whose name escapes me at the moment, was busted on a vacation in Latin America with his significant other while his wife and family were at home in South Carolina. And
Mark Sanford?
Sorry, what was that?
Was it Mark Sanford?
Yes, that's the one, Mark Sanford. Thank you. And he just rode that out. and was elected to Congress after he was termed out as governor. And the only thing that stopped his career was the fact that Trump happened, and he tried to speak up against Trump for the voice of the old way of doing things in D.C. Budget before racism. And despite being a reactionary jerk who got away with his own affair because of his friendships with the Christian right, was completely shut out of his own Republican Party for speaking up in even mild ways about Trump.
Which just goes to show you, no matter which party it is, party leadership views speaking out against them as a bigger threat than anything else you can do. I mean, look, I'm not going to speak out of turn or speak for anybody else in West Virginia. Sure. There are other stories of what the party's been doing to folks here. They go after people's livelihood. They've called the cops on several people, myself included. They do things that just go above and beyond what you would think would happen in a state political party internal conflicts. You know, you would think that these things could be resolved through words and resolutions and, you know, doing the things that you're supposed to do as a committee in a party. Well, but these things take on a whole different level because they're actively trying to suppress a dissenting movement from within, because a lot of people do see the problems. But when you see your good friend who stood up, get the cops called, get taken down in for questioning about some sort of nonsense that the party has alleged, well, it makes you think twice before you also stand up. And they've got this party. They've taken this approach of authoritarianism. They want people afraid of them and their leadership. But I just don't see how that's going to work here whenever the party lacks any power already. I mean, it just seems like they're running it into the ground, and who suffers? We've got white nationalists taking over this state at every level, and they're just twiddling their thumbs, allowing it to happen while fighting for power in their party. They're concerned about themselves and their own position. Where's the concern for the people?
What they care about is whatever money they can raise.
Well, you know, it's funny. We've got an attorney general candidate here running who is represented police unions who.
Sure.
And the DSA in one of my local towns, I just saw this posted. They posted up about the Citizens Review Board for their local town for the police. And then literally the next post was about this attorney general candidate for the Democrats who worked for the police unions, actually represented the police unions fighting citizen review boards. So what exactly are we doing in terms of standing up for the policies for the platform that the people, the rank and file, believe in? We're chasing these Republican voters, and at the detriment of the people who are supposedly our main concern. It just when you actually start looking at the actions versus the rhetoric, you see this big disconnect, and it's one of the main reasons why Joe Biden, the Democrats and Joe Biden have failed so miserably over the past 4 years. Is there's not one single substantive thing that impacted millions and millions of Americans. They've always taken the smallest action available for whatever issue so they could claim victory on it. Oh, we rescheduled marijuana. Well, that's not legalization, but they can claim we did it. We did it. They canceled student loan debt for fraudulent colleges. So they say we tackled student loan debt. Well, that was a very, very small piece of the part,
Yeah, they didn't touch most people's student loan debt. You have to remember that the people whose student loan debt was targeted for forgiveness were people who were eligible for forgiveness anyway under the existing system if they just applied for it. And a lot of those people were just looked up and forgiven automatically. And that's what they're so proud of, forgiving a bunch of people who should have been forgiven anyway.
And my theory, my belief is that they do that strictly for the headline. They want to be able to deflect, right? So if somebody says, well, what about student loans? They say, well, they did student loans. Did you miss that? What about, legalizing cannabis? Well, they rescheduled cannabis. Did you not see that? You've got these really small actions that they play up as these really big things, transformative, and they're not.
They talk about, there was the family child care credit. And yeah, but that expired and you didn't make it permanent. Well, the Republicans wouldn't let us make it permanent. Well, why didn't you just make it permanent the first time?
Honestly, that child tax credit in West Virginia was so impactful for people.
I'm sure it was.
And when they took it away, I know people that were devastated because that was the way that they waited for that, that couple of years when they got it, because we're talking about $10,000-$15,000 if you have a number of children, which a lot of people around here do. And they could make their deficit up at the end of that year with that lump sum of money, and they were able to relax a little bit in terms of the way that poverty affects us. And you take that away from them and you expect them to be loyal voters. It doesn't make sense to me, because they see it. They are able to discern whether or not these policies are impacting their lives positively. And the reason why people get so distracted and so hung up on all of these other fringe issues is because I think they feel helpless in every other way. I think that they think things are foregone, and so they get hung up on these things. What good or bad, the bigots and not. I think it's.
If I were running for governor or senate in West Virginia, which obviously I would never do, but if I were running for governor or senate in West Virginia, I would say, hey, look at this guy, Joe Manchin. He is the guy who blocked your child tax credits. He is the guy who blocked your health care. He's the guy who insisted on another pipeline through your already polluted mountains in order to keep his friends and business colleagues happy. And this guy, Jim Justice, he only exists because Manchin asked him to run. What has either party done for you? It seems like it's such a straightforward argument, which is why, of course, the Democrats are so obsessed with controlling ballot access. But to switch to a national story, because it was in the news and I'm really interested in your take on it. There's a whole lot of talk now about how maybe Biden shouldn't be the candidate, from the very media who have been telling us why Biden had to be the candidate. What do you think about that?
I've got a lot of thoughts about that, starting with they're right. First of all, Joe Biden, I saw a thing where he said, as long as I try my best, something along those lines, as long as I tried my best, I'll be happy. We won't be. I'm not a big Biden fan. I'm not a big Democrat fan, if you can't tell. I'm even less of a Trump fan, right? I believe that the threat Trump and his crew, I don't know what you'd call them, of insurrectionists really do pose a threat to the foundations of our country. And not that I love the foundations of our country. Everybody should know this. But when you have this sort of existential threat, which he truly is, to put up somebody who has this many flaws and this many, look, I respect that it's due to aging. I'm not putting him down or saying, oh, it's this. You have to recognize cognitive decline. And if somebody is in the situation where after 4 p.m. they're not their best, which happens with age, we have to consider whether or not that person is the best person to lead the country.
I have lots of thoughts on what you just said, and I'm going to interrupt because this is not the first time we've had a president who was not cognitively all there. The most famous example is Woodrow Wilson. Early in his second term, suffered a stroke. And his wife ran the country using him as a puppet while his doctor ran cover for her. But, the country survived. Democracy was, in whatever form it existed, was even preserved. Power changed hands peacefully, et cetera, et cetera. Ronald Reagan had very advanced Alzheimer's during his second term, particularly near the middle and end of it. And we survived that. Poppy Bush, which most people forget about, was on pills a lot of the time, speed to stay active during the day, and downers to sleep at night, for precisely the same reason that Biden is less than wonderfully active after 4 in the afternoon, because he was old enough that he felt he needed chemical help. When Trump says, is Biden's going to be on drugs, he's basically saying, oh yeah, if Biden's does a good job, it's because he's on drugs. And then when Biden doesn't do a good job, it looks like they didn't give him the drugs in order to prove a point, and it backfired. But that's all beside the point, because I wouldn't mind if the president had issues, if I felt that the president and the people around him were against genocide and for the people. If the president were a good person and the vice president were a good person and they had the interests of the people instead of the ruling class in mind, it wouldn't matter if the president wasn't able to function all the time, because the system is designed to compensate for that, because the president has never been able to be everywhere at once anyway, right?
Now, I completely agree with that. My issue really stems from the fact that we're in a competition.
It comes down to that it looks bad.
Right, exactly.
It comes down to that people who knew this privately, but were accepting a trust me from the people around Biden, are upset because trust me, bro, from a politician turned out to be bullshit.
I've seen that sentiment more than once, where people said they felt misled by the campaign, that everything was okay.
Jill Filipovich, who is a sort of media person, sort of political person, who's associated with very Hillary factions of the Democratic Party. She was saying it. She was saying outright that, oh, we trusted the Biden administration. We really trusted them. And it's like, why? As commentators and political professionals or journalists, isn't it your job to be skeptical and find out the truth behind what the Biden administration is saying?
Isn't that the point, though? We've had this situation where the media, and in an effort to keep Donald Trump from winning, I think that's clear, has done this thing where they've done a little bit of cover for Biden, for lack of a better word. And I don't necessarily think it's that. I don't think they want to be the ones to expose something if it hurts him and it's not true either. I mean, I do think there's a lot of that going on. I don't think everything is a big conspiracy. There's just a lot of things.
Well, but that's the whole thing. They don't want to be the person who's blamed for hurting Biden somehow, despite the fact that they're the media. It's their job to do this objectively without being scared of being blamed for something.
Well, I think it's clear that our media landscape is not healthy at the moment. My experiences with the media have been,
but imagine how history would be different if the Washington Post had decided they were too scared in the end of being blamed for releasing the Pentagon Papers or the Watergate stories.
No, I completely agree with you. Like I say,
I'm not even a fan of the Washington Post.
Right. But there is something to be said for the need for real journalism to provide an outside kind of a check to power for these people, which we just don't have internally. Look at what's happened. I mean, not to bring it back to me, I'm just saying, when you fight these things internally, you don't have as much power as you would like. Things are set up for the people in power. That's why you've got to have this independent third body, which is media, journalists out here in this country, who are supposed to double check everything and report
But
to us that everything, when things go wrong.
But instead of priding their objectivity and their professionalism and their reporting, they pride themselves on their relationships and their contacts and the people they know and talk to on back channels off the record. And that's not necessarily a healthy media culture. And where and when that changed would be interesting to study, I think.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm sure it had to do with the ease of communication. As those technologies grew, it made it easier for the sharing of information for people to connect. I mean, think about it. If you're a journalist and you have an in with Chuck Schumer and he's telling you things, you're not going to want to risk that source of information that's provided you with your income. It's giving you your leg up in your career so far. So why would you bite the hand that feeds you?
Sure, you're going to protect sources, but at the same time, there needs to be some justification ultimately for protecting those sources. You have to be able to say that protecting that source is justified by the information that source is giving you about what the public is doing. And if that source is just quietly being corrupt themselves in the background and you're keeping their name out of it, well, now you've become an accomplice.
I completely agree. It's an integrity issue within that field.
And you have so-called liberal reporters who are making these little compromises with the Trump administration to maintain their access.
Right. The way that they've handled the second Trump campaign is not that dissimilar from the way they handled the first one.
Which ended up, let's remember, the way they handled the 2016 campaign ended up electing Trump by giving him all that free media.
And I'll say this, I don't think they give him as much free media time, but the problem is the cat's out of the bag. And the way that they handle his campaign, the way they cover it as though it's serious. I mean, I get that it is serious, but at the same time, they give him a gravitas that is unwarranted for who he is as a person.
It depends on the media, I am sure. I'm sure Fox covers things very differently and prioritizes very different stories. And I know that CNN hasn't talked about things quite as much. But there's a Trump story on every show on MSNBC every day, often more than one.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
he's running for president again. They're not running the same number of Biden stories. And if you're going with this all press is good press, then Trump is winning the media war.
Very true. Very true. But they're scared to cover Biden for the reasons that we discussed earlier. I mean, there's a real issue going on within the Biden campaign and with Biden's health, and they're addressing it, but not really addressing it. It's just giving a mixed message that's going to tank confidence in his campaign from regular people. I'm not saying,
they're in a trap. Yeah. They're in a trap where they have to be able to triangulate between the president is so important that we absolutely have to stop Trump from winning president. That's point A. And point B, which they have to somehow draw a triangle with way over here at some weird, funky, not even straight line angle, is that they also have to convince people that it's not, that the individual president isn't important enough for Biden's obvious lack of capacity to matter.
Well, and doesn't that go to speak to the fact that, they vilify Trump, but are they doing enough to really call out the rightward shift to extremism that mainstream Republican politics is embracing at this moment?
And they're cooperating with the sort of democratic normalization of all this.
Exactly.
The Democratic Party is doing all this normalizing of right-wing bullshit, especially when it comes to stuff like the border or 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 trans people, because they figure trans people are such a small group that it's not really a voting issue if you throw them under the bus. Whereas if you stand up for them, there are more bigots than there are trans people, and they really are making hard calculations like that.
I'm living that in
I
West
know.
Virginia. I mean, we see that happen. They passed a resolution praising Texas with Democratic support
Yes.
for their actions on the border. You've
So
got
some people try to claim that was ironic.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, they've done this with intention. They've actively pursued further right policies in order to win over vote. And it's like I said, you take a look at the numbers in West Virginia, for example, because that's where I'm at. We have had a major shift. There's fewer Democratic voters than there were, and there's way more independents than there were. People are clearly shifting mainly from Democratic Party affiliation to no party affiliation or to Republican. So we've got this shift of people saying we don't trust the Democratic Party. Well, I do think that a lot of that people will say, well, it's because you've gone too far left. They don't support this, that, and the other. I think the real issue is the efficacy of the party. I think that they view it as a corrupt party. They can see the things that we can see, and they've said, I don't trust them to do anything for me, which is valid at this point.
I've always felt that when it comes down to it, there are people who will look at the Republicans and say they're bigots, they don't want to do anything to help poor people from the government end of things. But at least they're Christians and they're good people, and these Democrats are crooks. Now, I don't agree with that point of view, but it does remind me of something a very corrupt Democrat once said. Harry Truman said that if you give a voter a choice between a Republican who calls himself a Republican and a Republican who calls himself a Democrat, the Republican who calls himself a Republican will win every time.
I mean, honestly, you can look at the race history here since 2014 in West Virginia and see that that's true, except for Joe Manchin. He's the only one who's been able to successfully run as a Republican, labeled a Democrat.
Well,
and honestly, that's what.
Yeah, I mean, even people forget about it because he was connected with the Dixiecrats and the KKK. But Richard Byrd was also really liberal on a bunch of things. And not Robert Byrd?
Robert Byrd.
Sorry. Robert Byrd was really liberal on a bunch of things and Manchin never came close. So all right. You have a point. You've already got Republicans who are using the fact that Robert Byrd was once in the KKK as an attack on West Virginia Democrats in general in the first place. And then Joe Manchin is even worse for people than Robert Byrd.
That's true. I mean, Robert Byrd was clearly not. He had major issues, but one of the things I can say is he was one of the people who was opposed to the Iraq War.
Yes,
one of the
people. There's someone else. There's someone else who kind of proves that you can do some of these jobs despite not being functional all the time.
No, that's exactly right. And I say the things that I said earlier. I do want to clarify that I made reference to it, that I wasn't trying to attack him on those points. The issue is that the public's interpretation of these things, they are the ones who will see it and say, I don't have confidence in this man. And like you said, the team hasn't done enough for us to have confidence in them either. And this causes a major problem as we go into November in terms of public perception of how a Biden presidency is going to look in the second term.
The thing that's really the wild card now is because Trump is the first Republican in a while where you can point to in an unequivocal way that most liberals and most conservatives will understand and say, but look, this guy's clearly not a Christian and a good person. he's clearly corrupt too. And that's where Trump was running into trouble when he was up for re-election, that in COVID. And I think the way that Biden has handled both of those issues, COVID and corruption, swings back to in a way that eliminates Trump's penalties in those areas, because, Trump's just going to attack Biden for doing all the things Trump did or lie outright, whereas Biden's going to go through this tortured rigmarole of defending the truth as he sees it, which is a very difficult position to triangulate.
Look, you're not wrong. I mean, when the start of the year, I said Trump's probably going to win. And then, I don't know, maybe in May, I started saying it's looking like it could be a toss-up. I really don't know which way this thing's going to go. And now it's leaning more towards, I don't see how their campaign comes back from this past couple of weeks. I really don't.
The thing that comes to me right now is, there's a lot of talk on the internet about how Kamala Harris needs to be the candidate now. Including from people who were like diehard Bernie people in 2020 and who would not have ever said anything good about Kamala Harris at that point. And it's kind of silly because it ignores the fact that the whole reason Biden was in trouble with a large portion of the Democratic Party base, even before his health issues put everybody in a panic, was this whole thing in Palestine where Biden has been the voice of the administration and has been happily cheerleading for the IDF just like Biden.
And again, this is so, I've not even touched on that point. I've talked more about domestic issues, but yeah, I've been doing a little bit of outreach to some youth voters for a campaign I was working on. And it's been pretty universal, the response. I've worked, what's this? My 5th election working professionally. I've never quite had so many people tell me, I'm not voting. I have absolutely no interest in supporting either party. And these young people today, very well informed. It's not like, I don't know, I felt like I was well informed, but these kids today, they know about the foreign policy. They're telling me I'm not going to support a genocide party. Anybody that supports genocide isn't getting my vote. They understand the power that they wield. And people criticize them, Democrats especially. But if enough of these people start sitting out or voting third party, we could actually start seeing some movement in those directions. At a certain point, we have to understand that this stagnation and the status quo, eventually something is going to give.
And that's the thing. Eventually something's going to happen. The big question is, how long is eventually?
And what's going to happen? That's what I keep telling people. If we don't actively fight for the future that we want to see, when we realize that things aren't going well now, we're all but giving over the reins to the people who are already organizing. And not to keep hitting on this point, but Project 2025, these Nazi types, these super uber conservative white nationalists, Christian nationalists, whatever you want to call them, they are organized. They're prepared. They've been prepared for the takeover of America. And I really think that people like us who are, not so violent and so, I don't want to say crazy because that's not the right word, but chaotic. That's the better word. We really got to be prepared for what could happen. Things happen in a blink of an eye. And I really have been ringing the alarm. I do what I do because I believe we're on the precipice of something that could either be fantastic for us or one of the worst things that we could imagine. And I really do believe that. And how we message, how we interact, how we organize is going to make the difference in the outcome.
I think, and I'm not trying to talk up what I do, but one of the things that I think about a lot, because I have people on to talk about COVID, which is something that the government has been trying to cover up. I think a lot about The Stand. If anybody's seen either the original TV miniseries or the more recent series or has read the book, then you know there's a radio DJ talking about what the government is doing who ends up being killed by the government on the air. And I think that thinking about that sort of thing is why a lot of people find some way to pander right, because they're looking for some sort of protection, some way to stop that from happening to them.
I guess it is. It really is in how you view the systems, I suppose. To me, I hear people saying, for instance, this is Europe, but I saw a conversation happen on, I believe it was X. We're going to say X now, but about
I never say X. I always call it Twitter.
Okay, fine, Twitter. And the conversation was between a European group, one bigoted person talking about immigration, and one person arguing against, and it basically came down to this. I've kind of lost my train of thought here, but it's just the way in which that we reduce everything to these people. I've lost my train of thought completely. If you want to save me here, I'm not sure.
Well, you mentioned France there and Europe.
I did. What was the topic of discussion there? If you could refresh.
Well, we were talking about pandering right, and you were probably thinking about the fact. You were probably thinking about the fact that the French far right did much, much, much better than expected.
That is exactly what I was thinking about. I saw, and it was a French person. It was a French woman who said, "Well, I don't want to be." Basically attacking Islam and saying that she didn't want to be a victim of Islam. And so she was voting for the people who would stand up to it. Embracing far right ideologies is something that I think only somebody who's a member of the majority would even consider as being a protective.
Well, look at what Western media tells people about Muslim people, even as it tries to decry racism against Arabs or Islamophobia. What you see is the media continually telling you that Palestinians are terrorists for fighting for their own self-determination in their own homes, despite being occupied by settlers. And the media justifies that because the media is aware that it also has to justify the founding mythology of America, which is not dissimilar from the founding mythology of Israel. And the two are connected, and the two founding mythologies are connected because of the number of Americans involved ultimately in the formation and peopling of Israel.
I completely agree with that. You see the parallels and the way in which the indigenous population is subjugated to, at this point, I think it's safe to say a genocide.
As a person of Navajo descent, what do the words manifest destiny mean to you?
Exactly right. It means that we're going to kill everybody here, and we're going to decimate the population, and we're going to actively, And one of the things that really gets me is that comparison. I had an argument with somebody about drawing a comparison between Palestinians and Native Americans, and it was another Native American. And to me, I can't understand how you couldn't see the parallels to the way in which this genocide over there mirrors the one that happened over here, with the end goal being replacing the indigenous culture and group of people with the new. And, if people eventually, once the culture is thoroughly decimated, I'm sure that they'll start an integration of these people, back into their way of life.
They had tried to start doing it after the 47-48 war. There was the Israeli Arab Union, which was the Palestinian party that recognized the facts on the ground meant that they needed to work within the Israeli state in order to better the material conditions of the Palestinians. And that Arab Union supported the labor Zionist governments early in Israel's history in order to keep the scary people out of power. And many of the worst things happened under these so-called left-wing labor Zionist governments. And we
you have to be careful whenever you make these political alliances too. I mean, that's one of the things that we can take away here in this day and age as we're looking for ways, alternatives to Democrat, Republican. It's like the Rage Against the War Machine there a couple of years ago, where people were actively rallying with, Christian nationalists, Nazi types, these people who are really bad actors under the guise of being anti-war. You've got to be careful who you prop up with your voice and with your presence. That's something I've been trying to get across here in West Virginia to a lot of people, is the importance of our image being used by others to give them some semblance of legitimacy. I refuse to have my picture taken with anybody for the most part because of that. It's something you have to be very careful with.
The good news is that the Mises Caucus, the group in the Libertarian Party that co-sponsored the Rage Against the War Machine, they were not able to win the Libertarian presidential nomination for one of their people, and it went to a guy named Chase Oliver, who is perceived as about as liberal as you're going to get from the Libertarian Party, which means that all the libertarians who were scared of the real Nazis think that they have won a big victory against Nazism.
Hey, that's good to hear in some ways. I mean, you've got to be careful with any of these movements that you've got to watch for internal takeovers and
and I'm glad that they were able to keep the Mises Caucus from nominating a candidate, and I'm sure that Chase Oliver will be no worse than any of the other wonderful libertarian candidates instead of a horrifying nightmare.
Right. I've had a few run-ins with these libertarian caucus, state parties, caucuses on Twitter. And some of these people, especially the Mises Caucus, their ideology just doesn't seem to track at all with what they say. I don't know.
So
I don't get the disconnect.
So you have to understand that the Mises Caucus are the people who convinced the MAGA communist types that MAGA communism was possible in the first place.
Interesting.
And now the MAGA communist types have this argument, this complicated argument that the structure for socialism already exists in the United States. We just need the right people to take it over and get rid of the wrong people, which is very Nazi.
A little bit, yeah.
And so you've got this position, basically call a minarchist capitalist state with corporate power communist, and because the corporations own the state. And then as long as the right dictatorial party is in power, that's communism, right? No. But that's basically what we're seeing. And it's like, as long as the right dictatorial party is in power, that's libertarianism, right? It's the same argument on both sides, different words. That's why they get along so well. They have the same root message.
Right.
And it all panders to this idea that the average American is anti-abortion and hates queer people and probably racist.
That's so common. You hear that one all the time. It's the same reason why Democrats here, they say, oh, we can't embrace the trans issue because that doesn't resonate with people. Well, you know what? Until somebody takes that stand, we don't really know.
While I agree that voters, because let's separate voters from the actual American people for a moment. The way the system works, a lot of people don't vote. Traditional non-voters outnumber Republicans and Democrats in some states.
Well, that's in West Virginia. Like I said, there's been a major rise in independent voters.
For those who don't understand the political science jargon, a traditional non-voter is someone who has not voted consecutively in at least 2 elections.
Right. And honestly, so I was just saying, like, independents here outnumber Republicans, Democrats. Beyond that, if you look at the number of adults who aren't registered, I think it's something like 55 or 60% of the population. It's huge. So a mixture of independents and non-voters could fundamentally change the landscape just in West Virginia, let alone any state. The problem is you've turned so many people away from the process.
And yet the political infrastructure of American elections is designed to prevent that. It's a structural issue.
Right. It's by design. Yes.
It almost doesn't matter whether it's by design or not. I hate to sound overly predestinarian because I do believe in free will, at least to some extent. But there are certain deterministic forces at work in institutions. And those deterministic forces tell you what's going to happen in the future based on what's happened in the past. And that's why you have to break with those institutions sometimes. And the trouble is that if you look at history, the break with institutions is more likely to take the form of some kind of extreme fascism than some sort of radical people's movement, because extreme fascism is where the money is.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said earlier about the way that we organize and the way that the left has to start actively preparing for the next phase, for whatever comes next. We have to be very well prepared and organized. And you know what? The issue is, there are going to be some places that are just going to be outright dangerous for people. And this is the worst part. There are going to be victims, no matter how this fleshes out.
Well, I mean, let's talk about things right now, because the way things are right now is good to think about in terms of both local, state, and national politics. You should be thinking about all of this if you're still voting, and it should determine how you vote, maybe whether you vote, maybe how you interact with the people you vote for after they win.
That's the thing. That's the thing to me. I think a lot of people need to get on board with. You've got a lot of people who do vote and all of that, but so many people involved in the process think voting is where it all begins and where it ends.
Well, they think voting is where it ends instead of where it begins is the best way I would put it. They think it begins with the election and ends with voting.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And they see any attempts to hold somebody accountable as a personal attack or some, I don't even know what it is. To me, some of these people that even I have accused of these things, maybe they could be worked with in the future if they change course.
The best example I can think of is there was this thing going around where a lot of people who, probably were respected more before they said this than after, said things like, what was it? Oh, I hate it. Now I lost my train of thought.
That's the worst, isn't it? I just every once in a while just leave.
But people lost respect. What did they say they understood and sympathized with? I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Oh, no. I remember what it was. People that otherwise had a lot of respect before they said this, said things like, why is a Palestinian group in New York protesting Jamal Bowman when they should be protesting Richie Torres? And, the Palestinian response was, number one, don't police us if you're not Palestinian. That looks bad. And number two, and this is the salient point, we have no influence with Richie Torres. He's openly in the pocket of the occupiers, the settlers. We're supposed to have Jamal Bowman is someone we have influence with. That's why we're protesting him, because we think he might listen.
That's exactly right. They protect the people in power from any criticism. Any criticism is viewed as strictly negative.
And Bowman ended up losing to the pro-AIPAC guy who raised large amounts of money. And anybody who wants to blame pro-Palestinian activists for that should instead blame the institutions of the Democratic Party that shape themselves to favor the candidate who contributes the most money to the party.
Great point.
Because, I mean, we can't ignore that. The Democratic Party cares the most about who's giving them the most money. That's why AOC did things like give money to moderates from her PAC that people had donated to her to help progressives win. Because she needed to do what she needed to do to the party in order to protect herself.
The parties have entirely too much power, I think, is the takeaway from any conversation once you get into it.
AOC herself, and I think the fact that nobody's talking about this anymore is a good example of how it co-ops you when you live this. AOC herself was telling journalistic outlets about how the number one job for freshman congressmen was actually telemarketing for the DCCC, asking millionaires for money so that they could get the best committee assignments.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. You wonder what the problem in the system is. All you have to do is actually take a look behind the scenes with things that are they're very open about it.
And this is like 40 hours a week. So a congressperson, if you're a freshman congressperson, your day job is to work full-time earning money for the DCCC, who are the worst Democrats in Congress almost without fail, and who give their money to the worst people in Congress. I mean, we're talking the anti-abortion, anti-queer guy in Texas. We're talking the guy who beat Jamal Bowman. We're talking all these terrible people.
It's something to really. Again, this is the way that I view things, and this is the way that I've handled my work here in West Virginia, has always been to make sure that these institutions, which claim to protect the most vulnerable people in society, are actually doing that. You know, one of the most insidious things that any institution can do is to use those marginalized people for fundraising, for gaining votes, for whatever it is, and then turn their backs on those people. And that's exactly what we've got going on in the Democratic Party. And so, you know, you've got these people who are angry with activists trying to hold people accountable. But, you know, if these Democratic politicians would be a little bit more accountable to the rank and file, you wouldn't see as many of these actions, right? So it really is about putting that onus on that upper level person, on those leaders, rather than on us, the people who are trying to just live and survive and to not be subjected to the worst of the worst from these far right psychos. I mean,
and then you have the people, and I swear this is a serious barrier to real organizing, and DSA is deeply responsible for this sort of thinking. But you get people saying things like, well, I think a regular participation in elections is like the minimum low bar for any socialist. It's like, excuse me? Seriously? That's your minimum low bar, not a class analysis or even a basic have versus have not simplification. Your takeaway is that your takeaway is that socialism is when people vote.
It's simply not enough. Anybody should be able to see that. So I don't understand the I guess maybe it's easy. You want to feel like you're doing something. I don't want to criticize people either here.
Well,
You know,
so
it's just simply understanding so that we can make those changes and engage them in
I
a
will
more
be
meaningful way.
I will be open and honest about my views of voting. So, if somebody lives in a genuine swing state, you know, you cannot, I will not ever judge someone in a genuine swing state who's really, 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 really worried about something changing for the worse. I will never tell somebody in a swing state not to vote their conscience. I won't get mad at them for voting Democrat. I won't get mad at them for voting third party. How they vote is their business, not mine. If somebody asks me my opinion, I will share my opinion. On the assumption that people watching my show care about my opinion, if you vote for president, I don't think you should consider either Trump or whomever the Democratic nominee ends up being. I think you should look and see whether Jill Stein, Claudia De La Cruz, Cornel West, or Joseph Kishore are on the ballot in your state, and if they are, vote for one of them. Those are the only people anyone should consider voting for president. That's just my opinion if anyone cares. But I'm not going to judge anybody in a swing state for voting their conscience. I do get very upset at people who don't understand the way voting works in safe blue and safe red states. I get really upset when people, local voting matters, state voting matters, but in a safe blue or red state, the only way your vote matters is actually if it helps a third party. If your vote does not help a third party in some way, it just helps the status quo, whether it's red or blue.
That's so true. I mean, I wish people would consider that option. I mean, like here in West Virginia, it does not matter. I mean, so I worked for the Marianne Clater campaign in 2020. We got, I think it was 10, 20,000 more votes than Joe Biden. And she was the Democrat for state auditor. There's not a chance people are going to vote for Joe Biden here. So if I go out there and give my vote to Joe Biden, it adds a little bit to his numbers. It does nothing really in terms of the DNC doesn't care about my vote here, clearly. So, I can have more.
Let's be more important. But let's take it one. I'm in a safe blue state. Okay. I'm in Oregon. So in one sense, the DNC has my vote no matter how I actually vote for president.
Yeah.
Because Oregon is going to go Democrat. Almost certainly. The only thing that would stop Oregon from going Democrat is a whole bunch of Democratic voters staying home or voting third party. Now, I wouldn't hate to see that happen. I would live with the consequences of a Republican victory. It wouldn't be as much different from living under blue state Democrats as a lot of blue state Democrats seem to think. I've lived in a red state before. I lived on the Tennessee-Virginia border for almost 10 years. I'm not going to say I loved it. I moved away. I didn't like it. But the reasons I didn't like it had nothing to do with the fact that being there and being here in Oregon, it doesn't matter that one state is red and one state is blue. By not having a red or blue opinion, I'm automatically disenfranchised in this state. And because it's not a swing state, I can't even help determine whether my state is red or blue because of the way the Electoral College works.
Yeah, no, you've got really good points on that front. And like people, if they're going to view voting as their one duty, they really should take that into full consideration and weigh all of their options and see how their vote will have the most positive impact.
Well, and
it might not, but
and that's where people start to talk about this tactical voting and quote Noam Chomsky a lot. Noam Chomsky invented this idea of tactical voting that most people should probably vote, even though it really doesn't matter how you vote. And if you live in a swing state, a state where your vote might conceivably affect the outcome of the election, you should probably vote Democrat, because that way things will not get bad as fast and you're not being accelerationist that way. Now, I understand that point of view, but it feels like the Democrats are accelerationists too now because of their constant compromises with Republicans on existential issues like global warming and whether or not we should put the homeless in prison.
That's honestly, you've hit the nail on the head there, in my opinion, is the way in which Democrats have decided to, rather than, and again, I think this comes from the leadership being so corrupted. I mean, I'm not going to mince my words here. I believe that money has done a terrible number on the leadership of the Democratic Party. These people are entrenched. Like I said, I'm fighting a guy who was a Clinton era administration official because these people throughout their entire lives will try to impact the policies of the Democratic Party, and so we do have to be very considerate of the way in which we approach interacting with them. And I could agree with some of Noam Chomsky there in terms of accelerations, but like you said, when it comes down to it, we elect Joe Biden president in 2024.
Yes.
4 years from now, we're basically in the same situation. And are the Democrats going to be able to stand up to that
in 2028? In 2028, now keep in mind that this is based on potentially old information and the thinking may have changed since then. I don't know. I'm not as up on the thinking of DSA people in California as I made when one of their people who is no longer on social media made the statement on Twitter. But the former national political guy for DSA and National Nurses United, who's now involved in single payer advocacy in California and national level Medicare for all activism, a guy named Michael Lighty, had very high hopes for the progressive movement that Gavin Newsom would run for president in 2028. Now, Gavin Newsom is not a progressive. Gavin Newsom is a conservative. Gavin Newsom is emblematic of the corporate capture of California and their Democratic Party. Gavin Newsom is a man who was raised by the Gettys and who is best friends with the Pelosi's.
Well, it goes to the point too. A lot of people that call themselves progressives, they lack the I don't want to say radical nature that they need, but they lack a certain analysis to see that these people aren't what they purport to be. So Gavin Newsom is supposedly more progressive than someone like Joe Biden, but
the whole
day, it's not.
The whole image of Gavin Newsom as progressive is based on the attacks of California Republicans against Republican Democrats as being too liberal and totally untrustworthy for years and years and years.
That's a fantastic point.
And as a result, California Democrats have become more like the California Republicans who were voting for Republicans. And when you see what the Democratic Party wants to do to other red states, you have to remember that California was a red state from Nixon to H.W. Bush's first term, the first Democrat to win California for many years was Bill Clinton. And it's been a blue state ever since Clinton's second term. But the Democrats who run California now have a whole lot of the same politics as the Republicans who ran California then. Remember, California was the state where Nelson Rockefeller nearly upset Barry Goldwater in the primary.
Well, and honestly, so one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is just the way in which a lot of people my age, I'm 36, were just brought up with history being taught the way it was. A lot of it was final. You know, we won civil rights. We won this, that, and the other thing. And as things progress, I mean, once they made gay marriage legal, well, we won gay rights. I mean, it just seemed like everybody was accepting of this without realizing that historically, these are ongoing battles, and they will always be battles for the rights of people, because there's always going to be that bigotry somewhere within society. And it's our job to make sure that the majority of society doesn't succumb to that bigotry that's going to always lurk in the shadows.
What people don't understand is that Gavin Newsom is the political boss of California. His political daddy and the previous political boss of California was a state assemblyman named Willie Brown, who was also mayor of San Francisco. And Gavin Newsom worked for Willie Brown when Willie Brown was mayor of San Francisco, near the end of his time as boss of the California Democratic Party. And Gavin Newsom being elected mayor of San Francisco as Willie Brown's successor was a signal that Gavin Newsom was the new boss.
I mean, yeah, California is one of the biggest economies in the world, really. And so, of course, you're going to think that those parties they're going to be some of the most corrupted at a major high level.
Well, and when Willie Brown was mayor of San Francisco, a prosecutor named Kamala Harris ran for district attorney against the San Francisco DA, Terrence Hallinan, who had the lowest conviction rate in the country because he was not prosecuting drug users, sex workers, Johns, or nonviolent dealers. So naturally, the cops hated him. And the cops and the Dianne Feinstein, Dan White era Democratic Party, which was inherited by Willie Brown, supported Kamala Harris for San Francisco DA against this progressive prosecutor. And these are the so-called liberals. This is the political background that Gavin Newsom comes from, and he's this DSA guy in California's big hope for progressives. I mean, when you really think about it, the highest hopes progressives have are that a prominent conservative who makes liberal noises from a blue state that people think of as liberal might be president.
Well, you know, one of the things about Kamala was whenever 2020 came around, I was doing my Bernie Sanders podcast at the time, and we did a series on each of the candidates that wasn't Bernie. And I swear I had no issue with Kamala really beforehand. You know, I didn't do a lot of research, but that file that I made on her was the biggest file out of any of the candidates. I was shocked.
Well, It all starts with the part people don't talk about a lot, which that she was the cops and gentrifiers and pro-growth faction. The candidate of the people who applauded when Dan White shot Harvey Milk. Those were the people who elected, those people's political successors were the people who elected Kamala Harris.
Right. And, you know, I will say this though, it's frustrating to see that I really, really despise how the right wing of this country can take good
Well,
criticisms of Kamala, and they turn it into this
well,
racism.
that's
It
what
really,
makes me
it's
so
like,
upset. There are so many good criticisms of Kamala Harris you could make. Why do you publish some stupid headline about her being the first DEI president when she'd be just as objectionable if she were white?
that's my issue that I have, and it's like you see these people doing that. And by the way, uh, I don't know what DEI means. I thought it just meant minority. What
DEI is diversity, equity, and
Well, I know, no, I
inclusion.
mean, I know what it means in that sense. I mean, when they use it as a dog whistle,
When
because
they
to
use it
me,
as a dog whistle, they're saying affirmative action hire.
oh, so she would be because she was vice president and then got up in because
Because,
she was
but it's
black.
also, yeah,
Right.
because she's VP because of an affirmative action
Oh,
hire
okay.
is what they're saying.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just
Now, what
not
they
hip to
should
things.
say, and what they're trying to say, but they can't say without being racist about it because the dog whistle is necessary for the audience they want to reach. And the dog whistle is also how they bring over people who they otherwise couldn't reach by attacking someone they don't like.
Right. Well, I just thought it was code word for minority, like
It
black.
is, but it's also by using it, they're using a specific code word for an unworthy minority who didn't earn their job.
Right. That's what I mean. It's so much more nuanced than just minority, because that's
And
what I was
what
saying.
they're doing is, in a racist way, they're drawing attention to the fact that she did not win a single delegate in her own state when running for president.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you got to give credit where
But
credit
they
is due.
can't say that.
And
They can't say
right.
this is a politician who didn't even win a delegate in their own state without running for president, without putting a racist headline on it.
Right, that's what I mean. They're actively pursuing the racist vote. That's the point.
Exactly.
It's not about Kamala's actual bona fides or whatever.
It's more insidious, though. They're also trying to get people who don't like Kamala Harris to agree with them on something racist because of their dislike for Kamala Harris, and to say it's okay because Kamala Harris is bad personally.
Well, kind of like the anti-Semites have done with the Israel war.
Exactly. Or how anti-queer people or anti-immigrant people are always finding one case in a million where the bad person is queer or an immigrant as opposed to the white girl's father.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is what they're doing. And it is really disgusting to see, though. I mean, I saw it was the New York Post called her the DEI candidate, and it's like, that to me.
Well, remember, the New York Post is a Murdoch paper that is blatantly in Trump's pocket.
Oh yeah, they're a trash paper.
It's not even that they're just a trash paper. It's the New York Post is as much in Trump's pocket as the Inquirer was.
Oh, okay, then hey, I mean, all the more reason to dislike them. I'm on board. But yeah, it's to me one of those things where it's like, I don't want to have to defend Kamala, but I will in that regard. That's not the issue with her in any way.
I see no reason to defend her. I can criticize her in all sorts of ways and still say the Republicans shouldn't be racist.
Well, yeah. I mean, clearly that's the meaning behind it. But
no, I know
it shouldn't be this way, where we have allowed for a major political party to outright engage in what is undeniably racist behavior and rhetoric.
So when this is a show where I myself and our frequent guest and mutual friend Connor Exum and some others have bitched about other podcast hosts, especially those who tack right, people like Jimmy Dore. Well, so this is how people like Jimmy Dore end up tacking right. They end up agreeing with the racist or anti-queer positions of these Republicans because they dislike people they dislike.
Honestly, I think so much of this does stem from people's and I don't know how to frame this, but people's personal issues and the way we are, the way that we interact in society. I mean, so much of this is psychological and
cultural,
has nothing to do with policy. Sociological, great point. But none of this has really to do with policy with a lot of these people. It's just this general progression, and you can watch it happen. I mean, I've seen it. So one of my family members that was in the Indigenous Caucus with me has completely shifted. And again, this is a Navajo, is super pro-Trump now because of what the Democrats did. They say the Democrats are the most racist, and Trump's honest with what he says and all this, and I can't convince them otherwise. We lost one to the cause because of these kind of behavior.
I'm going to go ahead and I will say that, both MLK Jr. and Malcolm X went out on their respective limbs to say that the white people who are racist and pretend not to be are much worse than the white people who say they're racist.
Well, one of the things that I keep hearing is, like, from this person in particular, is the Democrats haven't done anything, and I know what to expect under a Republican. And there is something to that if things were to stay the same, if we were to manage to get through it.
Because what have the Democrats done to stop what Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida or what Greg Abbott is doing in Texas?
Right. It's still open season on marginalized people.
And if you ask people about that, you get people laughing about, well, what could they do? The president can't do anything he wants. Well, you're scared that Trump will do whatever he wants if he's president. Yes, but that's just because he won't follow the rules. So why are you following the rules? And by following the rules, I don't mean weaponize the FBI to arrest your political enemies, though, that would have been justified. And I don't mean complain about the Supreme Court and vote for Joe Biden. Because the problem is Joe Biden is on the record as saying he doesn't want to do anything to change the composition of the court before he normally could. He's against stacking it. He's against any legislation changing how long judges serve. He wants a right-wing Supreme Court as an excuse.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, take a look at how we've used, I say we because I'm a Democrat, how they've used Roe versus Wade, for example. At any point, like Obama, when he first got elected and had the supermajority, perfect time. Let's codify Roe versus Wade, have a major win. Any of these things that they could do in the moments when they could do them, that's not an option. They always point to the times when they don't have the ability to get it to the Senate floor, or they're going to be, whatever it is, as an excuse.
But when they fail and they say, oh, the Republicans stopped us, it's never actually the Republicans who stop it. It's some Democrat who gets some compromise made that gets the best parts of the bill taken out and some horrible part that only Republicans like put in on the promise that one Republican will vote with them, and no Republicans vote with them.
Yeah, that's true too. And there is something to be said for.
There was a time when it was Ben Nelson. There was a time when it was Joe Lieberman. There was a time before either of them when it was a Georgia Democrat named Sam Nunn. There is a time now when it's one of the guys from Virginia, Mark Warner or Tim Kaine. But there's always somebody who's going to be there to stop something from passing when the Democrats are in power by making them compromise more with Republicans who won't vote with them anyway.
I mean, there's so many things that are wrong with our system, but Democrats do have a certain, and I don't know the word for it. I don't want to say weakness because that sounds Republican, but they have an inability to take action.
The Democrats are undermined in any attempt to make deals with the Republicans by the political memory of the 1970s and what happened to liberal Republicans. Liberal Republicans who had made deal after deal after deal with liberal Democrats in the Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and Johnson administrations were purged from the party, not by the Republicans in the 1970s, but by Democrats running against them from the right. And Republicans have learned from this lesson of the 1970s that Republicans who cooperate with Democrats get screwed over by Democrats.
Yeah.
Whereas Democrats still seem to think that Republicans won't screw them over, which is just ridiculous.
Well, and again, I think it comes back to a lot of the times is the way in which these people make assessments, right? So you got these Democrats who firmly believe there's no point in taking any action right now. None of these things will make it to the floor of the Senate, let's say, or the president, doesn't have the power to the authority to do these things, even though the Supreme Court basically gave him a good bit of authority here this past week.
Okay, there's no chance, so vote yes. You gain support that way. If there's no chance, don't worry about it. Vote yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't understand a lot of the political posturing and decisions that are made in this country, and I don't understand people defending it either. I mean, we've got to get to a point where the leaders are willing to take action and take risks for that, put themselves in danger. I don't know if term limits are the answer, whatever it is, but there's got to be some mechanism in place to disincentivize.
So here's the trouble with any sort of mechanism. The reason that Trump resonated in 2016 comes down to 3 words: drain the swamp. And the reason that the words drain the swamp resonated is because of the kind of Democrats we're bitching about now.
Yes.
The people who are obviously corrupt, and more importantly, who the rest of the party obviously panders to, despite their being obviously corrupt and conservative, on the assumption that they need these people to beat the real enemy, the Republicans.
Right. That's the funny thing to me, though, is that we embrace these policies and allow further shifting to the right for both parties in order to seemingly combat it, when really,
because the way the Democrats won in the 1970s and maintained their Senate and congressional majority through the Reagan and Bush years was by talking a very loud game of opposing Republican administrations and very quietly making deals with them. And then selling those deals is much better than what would have happened if they hadn't opposed the original bill. Whereas ultimately, it just makes things worse for everyone.
Right.
Now, that's the political system that gave Democrats power, this fake opposition during the Reagan years. But they could not be the fake opposition to their own president, Bill Clinton.
Right.
And so their ability to maintain power fell apart once Bill Clinton was in power. It didn't come back until people really, really needed and wanted opposition to W. Bush. And that's when Pelosi became Speaker the first time.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I say, when people really start to contextualize American history and our place in it.
And
I mean, it's not as stable as people want to perceive.
And that was the kind of fake opposition I'm talking about again, because when Bush was in power, Democrats were always stopping Republicans from doing stuff. But as soon as Democrats were in power, Democrats were always making deals to help Bush do stuff.
Right.
And that can't be ignored. And even when they were making noise and stopping Bush from doing stuff, that was only very specific stuff. Pelosi and Biden were still lying to help him invade Iraq, for instance.
Exactly.
And we let Bush off the hook for that. And by letting Bush off the hook for that, we let Biden and Pelosi off the hook for that. We've memory holed the whole Iraq war and how bad that was. Mostly because of things Obama did in forgiving the Iraq criminals.
Well, you know, I mean, for me, the Iraq war and the war on terror in general is exactly how I came into politics. It's what opened my eyes to I mean, you know, growing up in that age, I had friends that went off as soon as they turned 18 and didn't come back. It's one of the most impactful periods in my lifetime. And, you know, people today don't really remember or think back to that period. I guess if you were not so what's the word I'm looking for? Impressionable at that time period, it might not have seemed so.
Yeah, I mean, and
dramatic.
let's remember for all the persecution of Julian Assange in the media for allegedly helping Donald Trump win. Let's not forget that the crimes, alleged crimes, because they're not crimes in my opinion, but the alleged crimes to which Julian Assange pled guilty were all things that happened when Obama was president and that revealed things that happened when W. or Obama was president.
Right.
So there was nothing about Trump in any of the so-called crimes that Julian Assange was forced to plead guilty to in order to get out of prison.
I mean, that makes sense. Character assassination is the go-to for people in power. You want to negate any criticism that these people bring forward, and the best way to do that is to taint the messenger. And it's scarily effective.
There are legit criticisms of Assange, but you know, the legit criticisms of Assange have nothing to do with the fact that journalism is supposed to be protected and that he was being personally criminalized for his journalism.
Right. And that's exactly the point, that regular people should be able to have that nuanced take. But it seems to be that people are more than willing to jump into one side or the other. Julian Assange is all hero or he's all bad. And it just doesn't make any sense.
Let me point out that because there's no way to tie it to Trump, all the people in office then in Pennsylvania were Democrats. Mumia Abu Jamal is still in prison.
Right.
As a journalist that no one's talking about.
And it's clear that we have a real problem in this country with, like we were talking about journalists earlier. Well, look at the persecution that we have put on to these people who come forward and who break stories that we don't want broken or that are national secrets. I mean, we say it's for national security, but really,
there's no national security. I mean, there's no national security angle for Mumia.
Right.
He was straight up basically accused by the cops of killing a cop and calling it murder under circumstances that look like self-defense.
Right.
And the only reason that he's in prison is because he's black and the person he killed in self-defense was a cop, which is not enough to vitiate his right to self-defense, in my opinion.
Yeah, no.
I know that's complicated for me to say to somebody who's still involved in electoral politics on the air. I'm sorry about that, Seth.
No. I mean, listen, I am totally with you on these things. I don't have all the answers. I do what I do because it's what I think I should do to make the most of what my skill set is and where I'm at in life. I do what I do. And I think that everybody should do what they can, where they are, to affect positive change. I don't think that my cause is going to it probably won't fundamentally change the Democratic Party, but hopefully it will serve to expose one aspect of it and open people's eyes.
So the idea behind the inevitability of revolution is that ultimately revolution is inevitable because it is the only way to change a system that will preserve itself in the face of every attempt to democratically overthrow it using an electoral system controlled by the tyrants.
Right.
So that's the whole idea of revolutionary theory. Now, that said, there are all sorts of things where voting can matter and make a difference, and voting should not necessarily be neglected as part of your strategy. But tactical or strategic voting doesn't mean what you think it does. And that ultimately tactical voting is, well, how will my local and state votes most serve to activate people? And how can I articulate the failures of reform? Because ultimately, let's remember, all these attempts to reform the system are only going to be successful if some sort of threat of revolution is behind them, which people forget.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things that I really truly believe in, that like I said, it's coming. I believe that these things are coming. We don't
While we forget about it all the time, the only reason the welfare state was allowed to happen is because people were desperately afraid of a communist revolution because of the civil rights movement and the movement for a liberal welfare state not passing.
Right. Well, I mean, shoot. Look at what were we talking about? Like Huey Long and FDR. Huey Long and the threat of a real people's movement in this country forced their hand to do a little bit more than what they probably would have in given in their own devices.
I don't know what to think about Huey Long.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
How much of what we think of Huey Long was written by the Democratic political machine of Louisiana that did not cry when he died?
Right. He's one of the most interesting political figures to me personally. But it's complicated. There's a lot to him.
At the same time, share the wealth are the words that we should be using as a political rallying cry now. Share the wealth.
That's a good point. I mean, it's effective, it's short, it's concise, and it tells you what we're about, really.
And that's even though I don't know what to think about Huey Long. Share the wealth is the right motto.
Well, that's right. I mean, and that's what I'm saying too. I mean, I'm not embracing Huey Long's actions all the way across the board or his ideology, but there was something to his persistence and his tenacity and his ability to get under people's skins in a way that would force them to take action. And there's something to it, and I think that we could learn a lot about that. Never give up, kind of keep pushing attitude. I think a lot of people eventually get burnt out and fall to the wayside. And I've thought about it several times about just dropping out of my bid for justice here in the Democratic Party, and that's the easy way out.
People who are willing to keep fighting for justice through the electoral system are necessary in order to show the failure of reformism. That's the paradox of it all.
Well, and honestly, I've said that from the onset. I've said I'm fighting this battle as truly and honestly as I can, but anybody taking a look at it can analyze this situation and use it for their own benefit. Third parties should be looking at this to recruit minorities. Look what happens if you're a minority engaging in good faith in the Democratic Party. And it's that kind of pressure that will force the DNC to take action if they ever did in the first place. You can't do these things in a vacuum. I can't sit here and defend the Democratic Party whenever I know that internally we've got issues. They've got issues. They're willing to throw us completely under the bus, deny our civil rights, our ability to organize under their banner in order to keep their narrative or their power structures in place. And that's not okay. And somebody needs to stand up. And I wish that more people would take a look at this and analyze what's going on from an outside perspective, not an internal Democratic perspective, because it's truly fascinating the way in which the powers that be are able to use these mechanisms within the party to keep people down, apparently without repercussion. We'll see what happens if I can get this to a court, but
and I understand, having seen your experience and I understand why some people end up going reactionary over this, because if you do not have a theory of revolutionary change, if you don't have something to guide your praxis, then you just end up making excuses for the path of least resistance every time, which is what the Democrats have been doing ever since the Cold War ended, even before, because let's remember that Jimmy Carter was a precursor to Reagan's policy in many ways.
Yeah, those are fantastic points. I don't know. I really don't have all the answers, as I've said before. And to me, I do what I do, and I hope that something good comes of it. And I hope that more people are taking that action, and more people, like, I don't know, so many times it's easy, like you said, I could have taken what happened to me a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, any of the times that they've put me down and dragged me out. I could have said, that's enough. I can't do any more of this, and just made it my goal to oppose the Democrats in West Virginia at every turn and make that my whole personality. But instead, I see it as a challenge. I believe that I'm right. I believe that my interpretation of the rules is correct. And I believe what they've done is a gross violation of our civil rights. So it drives me to continue down this path. But I could see how somebody else being vilified, being lied about, having these harassment campaigns targeting them, it's enough to drive you crazy.
The reason I get it is because I started my political journey as one of as the child of these liberal Republicans who aren't welcome anymore, both of whom are Democrats now. I started my political development with this idea that I wanted to help the Republican Party be better than it was. And the Republican Party was uninterested in being helped.
That sounds so familiar to me.
And it made me really dislike the Republicans, and I became a Democrat. And I was a full-on Clinton Democrat because I disliked the Republicans so much.
Ouch! Right, that's a hard turn.
Now, so there were lots of people who were full-on Clinton Democrats for this own the Republican stuff. That's exactly the same as the Trump own the libs stuff now. And the results were that we got Republican policy, but to own the Republicans.
It's so fascinating to see how these things get spun out in the after the fact. It doesn't make any sense when you really analyze it in terms of political strategy, but.
And my frequent co-host Bess Godin sending us love. Hey Bess, thank you. We love you too.
Yes, thank you.
And my voice is going, so I should probably wrap up soon. Anytime my voice is going, that's a sign. Do you have any final thoughts or anything to promote?
No, I'll just put a call. Just the simplest things that I'm doing. You can follow me on Twitter at the Seth Sturm. Not a lot is going on right now. Hopefully keep an eye out on things. I'm kind of taking a break from publicly doing too much as I set these things. I mean, I've made it clear to the DNC. I'll make it clear to everybody. I'm pursuing legal action against the Democratic National Committee and against the West Virginia Democratic Party. So if anybody has any recommendations for civil rights attorneys who might be interested in helping us out, by all means, reach out to me. We're going to take this thing as far as we can until we're forced to stop, and then we'll see where we are. But the fight continues. So
I appreciate that, Seth. I'm glad you're going to keep fighting. Please keep me posted of everything you can talk about related to what comes next. I understand the restrictions that set in place once you start talking to lawyers and involving judges, but please,
I have a history
here for what you can discuss.
And I want to say I have a history of my mouth getting me in trouble, so silence is sometimes the best option for Seth. So that's what
It's
I'm going to do
true.
here. Yes,
And that's something that I'll try to keep in mind too. But again, for what you are able to talk about, you always have a platform here.
well, I appreciate it, and I'll talk about anything. I really don't. I'm just not going too hard. I think I said a lot here today, but again, I truly believe in my position that it's firm, it's solid. None of this is made up. I have documentation for everything, and if my interpretation and the handful of people I've talked to interpretation of what we're dealing with, there's a pretty good chance that at least something was done that would definitely violate civil rights statutes, especially the Indian Civil Rights Act, which is itself something. It's a unique law itself. So there's a lot of different things at play here. We'll see how these things flesh out with the DNC. I have responded to their actual dismissal, and I'm not going to be pursuing anything until I hear back from them. I put a deadline on it of halfway through July. So I have, at this point, things are on the back burner until we make sure that all internal avenues are exhausted, because like I said, we're doing this the right way. We want to make sure that all I's are dotted, all T's are crossed as we take this to the public. And hopefully once we file an actual lawsuit, people will actually start covering this story and realize it's not just some personal dispute.
I would really like that to be true, especially since a bunch of the very journalists who were attacking you before are suddenly writing about how terrible the West Virginia Democrats are.
Same here.
They don't seem to be getting you on the phone and saying maybe this guy Seth had a point, which is kind of weird too.
Well, it's a handful of people. I don't expect anything from them. I would be happy if they would just cover it. They don't need to talk to me. They don't need to talk to Seth. I don't care. If they would just cover the story in an honest way, and let Indigenous people take the lead. I've said this before too. I mean, if we get the Indigenous Caucus back, I doubt Seth Sturm runs for chair again. I just think that it's important that we establish these boundaries and establish the rights of people to participate in these parties. I mean, if they get away with this, they're basically going to be able to discriminate against any ethnic or minority group that they choose to. We've got to make a stand.
Do we want a democratic society or not? If we want a democratic society, then we have to be willing to fight for democracy in our political institutions. If our political institutions cannot be democratized, they must be overthrown and replaced.
And again, I won't say I support overthrowing the DNC at this point in time, but you have a point there, Chris. I completely
now. I mean, obviously, I understand why you can't endorse anything that I say after this point. So I will just say that I have my opinion about the DNC is similar to my opinion about judges and cops. And on that note, if you have anything that you can do to support the show, I would very much appreciate it, folks. My promotion is simply the show itself. I'm here trying to bring you guys conversations about important things that are happening around the country and around the world. What fairly ordinary people who happen to be involved in some of the events that happen in response to this, think about it. I want people to talk about what's happening in the world and what we need to do about it. That's what we're here for. I'm here to help you guys learn anything I can. That's what we're here for. And to do that, the show really needs support. We need patrons. Patreon, I'm Eclectic Radical. If you can't support the show every month, then hey, if you're watching this on Twitter, like and share the video. If you're watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, share the video. This is true. Stuff that happens on this show is happening in major media months later. We were talking about Biden's problems as a candidate long before, and now the major media can't hide it anymore. So Bess is right. People who have been on this show have ended up in mainstream media shortly thereafter, most notably State Assemblyman Ron Kim in New York. But I don't want to toot my own horn too much either. This is one of the few avenues of independent media out there. Right now, it still pays for itself, but I need help. If you can't become a patron, consider tipping on Cash App or PayPal. I'm Eclectic Radical there too. We're easy to find. At the very least, though, keep sharing the content. Help more people share it. Keep sharing asks for money so more people can see it and that they can tip if they can. And we're going to try to keep this going. Right now, if I can get $486 together, I can switch to an annual subscription, take off some of the pressure of paying for the show every month, and maybe try to build up a chest to maybe hiring an editor to help me clip the show and do some more pre-recorded videos. But that's a goal that requires some level of support. And right now, we need to get that support, and I'm really asking for help. Thank you very much. And if we don't talk again, I'll be tweeting at you. Take care, Seth. I appreciate your time as always.
Thank you, Chris.
And everybody else, you take care too. Thanks. And again, we'll tweet at you.